Welcome to Real Life Fiction. I'm Matt James with Conundrum Publishing, international best-selling author of the Jack Riley Adventure Series. And today we will be talking to author Andrew Clawson. Hey, Andrew, welcome to Real Life Fiction. Happy to have you on.
Matt, thanks. I am excited to be here. Just thrilled. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. So the gist of the show is we are going to be talking about real life fiction, meaning a little bit of background about you as the writer, about maybe where some of the inspirations have come from that have kind of helped launch a few of your series, specifically one in general that I want to talk about, which is your Harry Fox series, mostly because it very much links into the main genre that I myself adore, which is those action-adventure, rompy, and I guess we now call them the archaeological thrillers. That's kind of the name that a lot of us have coined over the last few years. So can you just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself to kind of get started?
Sure. So my name is Andrew Clawson. I am a writer. I have about 13 books now out. What I'm focused on mainly is, like you said, the archaeological adventure series, the thrillers. That's, a passion of mine, just like it is for you. I've been doing this for about 10 years now, and it's just an evolving world that I'm excited to be in. Excited to be here to talk with you about this because I know we have similar interests. Your Jack Riley series aligns a lot with my Harry Fox series. So we'd like to dive into those and just kind of, like you said, nerd out on some things. So
oh, yeah, absolutely. No, it's like when I first discovered your work and I saw Arthurian Relic, I'm like, okay, all right, I like that. And then kind of start going through your portfolio a little bit, like I said, specifically this one series. And I was like, okay, I can see where this guy's coming from. He's very much into the mythology and the lore, but also a lot of that historical backbone. And that's what I try to do. Like, I try to have every story as grounded as humanly possible. Because I've done the sci-fi thing where I get into aliens are responsible for this. And it's fun. Don't get me wrong. The book that's based around called Cradle of Death, that I wrote was great. But at the same time, the kind of leaning towards that sci-fi, Stargate type of stuff, it was a little too much for me personally, even though I did really, really enjoy writing that book. And then when I started with this Jack series, I decided I'm going to get super grounded and just really, really dive into the area where he's going and into the lore and into the historical, like I said, the historical backbone of it. And it kind of just evolved into what it is. And I'm actually kind of interested in that. So with this series, how did you say, I'm going to write this style of series with this where did it come from in your personal world?
So the Harry Fox series is, as you mentioned, these books they're grounded in history, and I think we both take our inspiration from the historical roots and the what if, and you look at the past for inspiration, and you kind of just wonder, you let your imagination run wild. So specifically the Harry Fox series, the first book is called the Arthurian Relic, and it revolved, the MacGuffin, or the kind of central piece in the story, revolves around the Arthurian tale. King Arthur, Camelot, Guinevere, Sir Lancelot, Knights of the Round Table type of stuff. But what I did was I always had an appreciation for that story for, I read Le Morte d'Arthur in high school and loved it, and kind of got more interested in it. Obviously, there have been a lot of movies about King Arthur, and then in the Disney movie that we probably all watched when we were kids.
Oh, yeah. Sword in the Stone and all that stuff. Oh, yeah. I mean, classics.
Yeah. So, that just kind of having that background in the whole epic tale, it sparks an interest. And I thought, this would make a great story. And I wanted to tell it in a way that's never been told before. And I think that's something that we all try and do with our stories. You take something from the past and you put your own twist on it. And it makes people think while also engaging them and getting them to learn about the past. Maybe, learn a few things they didn't know before, but at least spark an interest in history.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. And that's the thing is, the one thing that I reiterate constantly whenever I talk to anybody about this stuff, but specifically other authors, and funny enough, I was just talking to Ernest Dempsey about this, and he had me on one of his shows, and him and I overlap like incredibly well as far as like interest, and we laugh about it all the time, and we're like, we need to like coordinate with what we're writing, because it just seems like you and I are always picking on the same stuff. And like, I'm currently writing a book about my version of Shangri-La, and it's one of those things where like I come from modern is like the Uncharted like series and like that kind of stuff, where like one of the biggest stories of that series is he does a book about Shambhala, which is like the grounding of Shangri-La. And I'm like, man, I really want to tell this story. I really want to do something with it, but it's been like beaten to death over the years with so many different movies and stories. But that actually makes it more of a challenge and maybe more fun, because I really get to do it my way. And then the story develops and you're like, yeah, this is completely different. It's like, you really don't really see it until you get like further into the book and you're like, yeah, I've never heard of anybody doing this before. So, but that's the fun of it. I mean, honestly, I'm sure you get the same thing. Like King Arthur. I mean, there's a ton of stories about King Arthur, but when you can really make it your own, it's like, it's even more satisfying, you know?
Oh yes, and like to reference your Shangri-La story that's coming along, which I heard a little bit about that, and I'm excited for it to come out. It sounds awesome.
Thank you.
It's this mythos, but it has such an open-ended storyline that it can become, because I mean, being honest, both of these are more fiction than fact. So a lot of this stuff can just be molded to whatever you want it to be. You can create your own, make it your own. For example, as you had asked, the Arthurian Relic that I wrote, that puts a new spin on King Arthur that you really haven't seen before, and I think that's what has been, the driver of success behind it. I know, just for example, your Jack Riley series, huge fan of it, and just full disclosure, I was a big fan of yours before we connected.
Thank you.
Your first book revolves around kind of a Third Reich treasure, Nazi treasure hunt, sort of. And while that's not a news story, the way you tell it is, and that's what makes it interesting, because we all come from this baseline level of knowledge about, the rise of the Third Reich and World War II and Nazi Germany, but then it evolves into a new tale that you've never heard before, and that's what makes it really exciting.
Yeah, and I'm like you in that I also love to pay homage to what came before me, and in this case, we all owe our existence to Indiana Jones. And like, I was the weirdo that had indie stuff where all the other kids were Star Wars and Star Trek. You know what I mean? Like, I loved that stuff growing up. And so it's like, what does Indiana Jones, or what is he known for in a lot of his movies? He's known for punching Nazis. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. I mean, like, that's kind of like his antithesis. That's like his bad guy is the Nazis. And it's kind of just, I'm like, when I read about that treasure, specifically the Nazi gold train, and I'm like, how can I do this differently and do this bigger? Because I'm like, yeah, there's supposed to be like $40 or $50 million worth of treasure was stolen from all the royal families that the Nazis took over in Poland specifically. And I'm like, where is it? What happened to it? And then as I started doing more research, and I realized that there's, God, I hate to say it if nobody's read the book though, because
yeah, you don't want to spoil it.
Because this is a part of the process, which is what I also want to talk to you about. Is that book was supposed to be 100% Nazi gold train, and it is, but it evolved into something more bigger about halfway through, and that was like a holy cow moment for me when I figured it out. And this is like quite literally while I'm writing the book. And I was like, oh, this is going to be great. Like, this is going to be great. And I just went with it. And that's just kind of what it is. And if we want to veer that way, it's like, I don't outline a lot. I get the book started with outlines as far as like just the general direction. But I'm really interested in like your kind of process in getting a story together. Because I know some authors that like they outline so deeply that I'm like, dude, are you ever going to write the book? And it's like a book report, like a homework assignment, and I'm just like, God, I can't do that. And then I know some authors that need to outline a little more, but I'm kind of leaning. I'm not really in the middle. I do probably need to outline more personally, but I just love to let it flow organically because I think it comes out to the reader that the story is just like, you know, the twists and turns and stuff. A lot of the time is just us discovering the story as we write it.
I agree completely. You know, there are people who say that they write by the seat of their pants. They're pants.
Yep. They're pantsers. Yep.
And one or the other. And there's a lot in between. It sounds like you're in the middle there. I would say personally, I am much more on the plotting side. You know, I've got the Excel spreadsheet and I've got everything lined up.
Oh, yeah, no, I don't. I can actually, without giving away, I actually have yellow ledger pads. So, and every single book I've ever put together is a yellow ledger pad full of scribble. I'm just old school like that. That's basically my outline. And then when I'm writing, the Word doc has like 2 or 3 chapters ahead of like, blah, blah, blah needs to go here, and he does this. And that's it. There's like very little done. And it's probably by design. I just don't want to spend a ton of time not writing, I guess.
No, that makes sense. I think that method leads to better character development. I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but you have the genesis of the story and you know where you're trying to go generally, and then you let your characters take you there.
Yeah.
And that provides a story that is surprising not only to you, as you said, you figured it out through your first Jack Riley adventure, that you were going in a different direction than initially thought, other than just Nazi treasure. Again, sure. I don't want to give anything away. And the best stories are always about something other than what they're talking about, I think. And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, the character development is important. I try to keep my books character-centric, so they are the ones that are basically revealing everything. I don't want the narrator to have too much power. And it's probably a faux pas on my side that I do that, in that the classic third-person perspective of the he said, she said, I kind of dive into the knowledge of the character that I'm representing at the time more than typical. Meaning, like if it's Jack's point of view, a lot of the time I revert back to what Jack knows instead of what the narrator knows, which in this case is everything. A, because I don't want to reveal something too early, and B, I don't want to say it this way, but I almost feel like it, at least in my world, this is completely me, it feels kind of lazy. Because the narrator has full control and the narrator can do whatever he wants, which is, of course, us. We are. That's what we do. But it's like if the character finds out, as in this case, the reader finds out, I don't know. That style has always appealed to me, and I have zero formal education when it comes to this kind of stuff. So I probably just developed that on my own because that's how I wish it was more. But I don't know. That's getting deep into the weeds, which we don't have to go. But and that's just style preference. I mean, everybody's different. You know, I've had people tell me, "Oh, you need an editor. You need to learn how to write. You need this. You need that." And then I've had a lot of other people say the exact opposite. So it's, whatever. But
yeah, no, you raise a good point. Kind of having that. If you have more of an omniscient viewpoint where you're all knowing, that takes away, in some ways, some of the suspense.
Yeah.
More of the way you described it is a lot of the way I think too. I imagine that there's a camera that we're viewing the story through the lens, and I always try and start out with having that camera at a high level, and you're looking down on the world, and it's more just kind of a general description, explanation, get people into the scene, and then that camera zooms in and it goes behind somebody's eyes, and you're looking at the world through their eyes, and you're living, and you can zoom out from the world and go back high and go into someone else's brain. But maintaining that point of view with the limited aspect that you described, I think that provides for in our world, a tighter story that has more surprises around the corner.
I agree. I mean, I do, but I 100% also appreciate I guess you'd call it the more classic style. Where like you're saying, you set the setting and then you kind of dive into it. I'm very much I guess this is the movie guy in me and the video game guy in me, where it's like I love getting my characters into like just a terrible situations and just crap and having them dig out of it. And like I'd rather have Jack like wake up from being beaten unconscious and go, what the hell, where am I? And then that's where the setting develops. And then he's figuring out where he is as the reader is. And it's probably because my biggest influences as a writer aren't necessarily other writers, they're actually movies. And it's like, so I see everything through that director's lens, which is more like how suspenseful and how cinematic can we make it. And then I'm also telling a story. So it's like, maybe that's just, like I said, that's just me. But I mean, all of my favorite writers are definitely not me. So, I mean, I can appreciate both styles. I've just, in this case, it's more like, probably because naturally one of the things I love to do is write from the first person perspective. I love writing from inside the character's head, like literally, and seeing the scene as it develops as you would if you were there. So probably blending those two styles is where I currently am. And I don't know, it works for me. It seems to work for most of the people that read my stuff, but I know it's definitely not the norm. And like I said, I can definitely appreciate the norm. But real quick, so I'm reading your bio on Amazon, and you have a rescue black cat, which is kind of cool because so do I. And I had to bring that up. That's just funny because my bio actually says the exact same thing to a degree. So I just thought that was kind of funny. Was he like we found ours? He was 8 weeks old in my mother-in-law's front yard. He was a stray. So he was and he just literally walked into her house looking for food, and I'm like. She's like, you guys want a cat? I'm like, no. And of course, my family's like, yes. I'm like, okay, here we are.
That's great. So just for all the listeners, we were chatting about this beforehand, and we both were talking about how our animals can come in and be sideline guests during any conversations we're having. So I gave my cat the boot out, and I know you got yours somewhere else, but then we had the dog to worry about too. So yeah.
I always say he's my desk kitty. I have this L-shaped desk, and for the camera on this side, it wraps around, and that's where I have like my phone charger. It's where I have like my yellow ledger pad because I'm probably like 60 at heart when it comes to notes. And he inevitably jumps on that side of my desk and just plops down on top of everything. So then I'm like moving everything because I like it when he's here. I just give him a little pet while I'm working, but he definitely loves to knock stuff over, so I have to kind of keep that area clean because he's coming up there regardless if I want him to or not. Oh, what do I call him? I just realized I called him a overly dramatic black cat, and that's kind of what he is. But I was trying to remember what I called him in my bio. But yeah, that's exactly what he is. Yeah. Now, of course, I have my dog looking out the window. He doesn't want to go outside and do anything, but I'm guarantee you there's a squirrel on the fence that he's going after, or at least he wants. But yeah. So we talked kind of a little bit about where a lot of this comes from. And I know we both have an affinity for like Indiana Jones and stuff, but was there any other inspirations for you, whether it's recently or growing up, that kind of blossomed your love for like this stuff?
So that's a great question. My first and foremost is, the Indiana Jones stuff. And I don't know if I can do this. I have the gold medal here.
Yeah. Nice.
Writing buddy sometimes.
Yeah. My camera. I don't know what I'm doing. So yeah, over my right shoulder past this map is actually the movie poster for Raiders. Yeah. And then I have a bookshelf on this side. The whole bottom of the bookshelf, like the entire bottom of the bookshelf is just random Indiana Jones, Uncharted, The Mummy, 1999's The Mummy, The Good Mummy. And actually both iterations of Tomb Raider, just because that's another big one for me. And it's just like as random stuff as you can find, collectibles that I have found over the years. I'm surrounded by this stuff. I even have a caricature that got painted, I guess, at Disney of me dressed as Indiana Jones. So on my wall. But I get it. And besides Indy, were you saying anything?
I do love the Mummy movies. Those are all Brendan Fraser. I think those are so much fun. I also, a lot of it has come from, this is going to sound a little different, but kind of an appreciation. I'm sure, I know you have the same thing. We've talked about this. Is the appreciation for history of all different eras. Specifically, I'm really into the Revolutionary War type of era. Colonial America.
Sure.
Late 18th century. That's really something that I'm interested in. And you can take, and just like we were talking about earlier, your Jack Riley series, it has inspirations from all across the spectrum. The second book references Teddy Roosevelt.
Yep.
So, the Revolutionary War, developing in America, kind of how we came to be, both the good and the bad, those are aspects that shape where the stories come from. And you don't have to have an artifact that's from the Mayans. You can have something that came from France during the Revolution or something of that nature. So realizing that history is an endlessly fascinating place to be mined for information. I had a love for the river. To get back to your question, love for that. Honestly, I have a feeling you're going to like these two. I was a big Back to the Future fan.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
back is the 50s. It's like, all right, that was a different time period. It was truly a different world. So anything that's behind us is always something that I really enjoy.
Yeah, and that's what's so cool about this stuff. And I still can't wrap my head around it. You have, maybe it's an appreciation for the reader, because there's so many great authors out there that write this stuff, and the stories continue to get pumped out and they continue to sell. And I think that kind of says a lot about the reader too, right? Where you're like, the reader is just as fascinated about this stuff as we are, as the writer. Because I mean, at heart, we're the reader too. But it's kind of cool that, like, I just referenced Ernest Dempsey. He had Where Horizons End come out, and that's basically his Shangri-La. And when I announced mine, it was like a couple months after that was released, and it's just one of those weird timing things. And people are like, oh my God, I can't wait to hear, or I can't wait to read what you've come up with compared, it's like people are gung ho about it. They don't care. They're just like, I want the stories. I want the characters. And I think that's what happens when you have those character driven stories, is people fall in love with the characters and they're just like, cool, another story about, with this character. They're not really, I don't want to say they're not as interested in the actual plot itself, but having those developed characters and those lovable characters really just kind of glue the story together. Because you can write about all this stuff all you want, but if there's nothing actually like fun or interesting going on, it's like, what's the point?
One other thing is, I don't know if you, the Bernard Saxon's stories, Bernard Cornwell's Saxon Tales, which they made into that Netflix series, The Last Kingdom. So those are set around the formation of England, and it talks about one of his ancestors who lived and fought around the time of the battles, and King Alfred was turning 4 separate kingdoms into one, the birth of England. So that was something that, another part of the past. But that story, there's so many Viking tales out there, but I still read them. They're great. It's different. There's a big hairy guy with a sword and drinks mead from a drinking horn, but they all have adventures, and they're different people.
Yeah.
They all pray to the same God. So it's a pretty cool way to look at through different viewpoints of history.
Oh yeah, definitely. I even did a novella with David Wood called Berserk, and it's a part of his Dane Matic expanded universe, and it was about Odin's Berserker warriors. But I went like way over the top sci-fi with it, like where it developed, where it came from, and it was basically like an alien relic that would change the hearts of men and bring out the worst in them and like the beast in them. It was the Spear of Odin, basically, which is a real thing, at least in the mythology of it all. But I just decided to make it like, obviously a little bit more, well, I guess super modern. But it was kind of the same idea. I'm like, I saw a picture of a fjord, and I'm like, God, I really want to write a book in this area because it's just gorgeous. I think that would be fun. And then I'm like, wow, I haven't really done anything in the Viking lore yet. And then, you just research, and you're like, cool, let's write about this. And then I kind of figured out a story just based around a picture that I saw, and a setting, The
stories that's interesting you say that. The stories can really germinate from the oddest points. Like, so I've actually wanted to ask this beforehand, we didn't get to it, that Jack Riley series. Where did it come from? And I have a reason for asking.
So the Jack Riley series is kind of my reintroduction into the archaeological thrillers, because the first series I ever wrote, really the first book I ever wrote, was Hank Boyd, and it was called Blood and Sand, and that was very much an homage to the line from The Mummy, my whole damn garrison marched out into the desert and all we found was sand and blood. And sorry, I just watched that movie like 3 times in the last 2 weeks. So Mummy 99 was just released in UHD on Prime, and it's completely remastered and it's gorgeous. And I'm like, okay, bought. And then I watched it a few times just because seeing a movie like that kind of looks more like new is just exciting for me. But that was my initial homage to indie. And the direction got really big and outlandish and sci-fi. And as a new writer, I got so over the top with it that it was honestly a little hard to reel in. And I don't want to necessarily say that series was a failure by any means, because it's not. That's kind of what made me what I am as far as like the direction I want to go. But the Jack Riley character specifically was more grounded in history. I kind of wanted a do-over, and I wanted something that was going to be more plausible. I mean, just the only way I could describe it. And the character himself was very much birthed out of, I think it was the movie 13 Hours with John Krasinski. And I think that was it. I'm really bad with movies and stuff like that because I've seen so many. But basically, I saw another picture of him in fatigues, and he had the beard. This is like buff, handsome, like badass John Krasinski, not Jim. Which, yeah. I mean, we all...
That Tom Clancy series, like, man, he's been in the gym.
Yeah, no, he's amazing. He's amazing. And my brain was going, that's Jack Riley. And then I start, like, I finally had, like, this, like moment. And the name came from Matthew Riley and Jack West Jr. So Jack Riley was, like, my thank you to Matt Riley for penning that series, because that was, like, the holy cow, rompy, more sci-fi in it than I'm usually writing, but at the same time, like, wow, this is like massive. This is like gigantic. And this 7 Ancient Wonders and that whole series was just like mind blowing to me when I first started reading them years ago. And there was like so many like pieces put together, and then falling in love with the Uncharted video games, and just there was like so many things I needed to say thank you to and wanted to pen and dive into, that it just kind of birthed the series when I sat down and said, I really want to get back into, like, because I deviated a little bit into some other styles because these are stories that I just never got to tell, and I'm like, yeah, let's write these. And then when I basically rededicated myself to the genre, the adventure genre, I went in with a full head of steam and said, this is all I'm going to write, because I mean, I know I'm good at it. I know they sell. I know for whatever reason I'll deviate, but then I inevitably just come back home. And I'm like, this time I'm just not going to deviate. And making that decision a few years ago was like the best thing I've ever done. Like you were saying, once you started writing Harry Fox, you were like, wow, I picked the right time to kind of dedicate myself. And honestly, we're businessmen at the end of the day. We need to do what is best for our, God, I hate saying this because I'm not this, but our brand. And but what sells? And I mean, honestly, and you can write the best books you want, but if they don't sell at the end of the day, they're sort of a waste of time. And when I realized, more or less, when I confirmed it, I didn't realize it, I confirmed it. It was the best decision I ever made. And the readers are thanking me for that because they're buying a lot of books.
I think you're onto something. This is also alluding to something we chatted about earlier offline. I think we're just gauging from our discussion, how many millions of people are there like us out there who enjoy the same things we do, who have these same, engagement with the parts of the world that have come before us. I think we're in, this is an underserved market, and there's a voracious appetite for this sort of content.
Oh yeah, and honestly, we can both thank No, actually, no, we can thank. I mean, regardless how awful this comes out, we can actually thank Corona for this. And I know that's depending on what side of the fence you are on with that. This is probably a bad thing to say, but people needed an outlet. People needed travel. They needed to disassociate themselves from the world. And Amazon has definitely seen a spike. The Kindle Unlimited program has definitely seen a spike. When you realize people for a while, and I mean, it sucks, but people for a while had nothing else to do, nowhere to go. And I wholeheartedly believe they escaped into fiction. And in this case, they escaped into fiction that also travels the world and gives them a new kind of a new outlet on life. And in this case, it's just the stories. And when I had readers specifically message me and said, man, being able to escape my current situation, whatever it is, really helped. Like, this was a great therapy for me almost. And I know a lot of authors who I've talked to have also said the same thing, is it's just like writing in general. I mean, it's escapism for us, and, for the reader, it's the same thing. And I think there's a connection there, especially when there's like a lot of world travel, when world travel was dead for a long time. I think the two things just kind of married each other. And I know I've seen a spike since then in the interest in this stuff, and it just continues. And I don't mean to be like black-hearted about stuff like that by any means, but it's like there's like a correlation, I think, with the renewed interest in a lot of this stuff versus people not being able to go out and do it on their own for a while.
You're onto something, and there's nothing wrong with being practical. As you said, at the end of the day, this is a business, and unless you're doing it as a hobby, which is fine too. Mm-hmm. We have to be aware. You have to always look to the bottom line and understand.
I think that's the interest that you and I both have. It is a hobby, but it's also a hobby that we get paid for. But it comes out in our work. Mm-hmm. And I really, 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 really love this stuff. And I want that to come out in my work. And that's the thing, is I'm not just writing for the bottom line. I'm writing in a genre that I also adore. And it just so happens to also be a genre that does well. And I'm very thankful for that. I can't say enough thank yous for that to people. And I really want that to be very clear to people that, we are writing in a specific genre that is like near and dear to us. This isn't just business for me. I know it's not for you. Like, that's not the only reason we do this. It's these stories mean a lot to us. So much so that, like, Jack's grandma, who is like the basis for him going to Poland in the first book, is got a lot of the representation of my grandmother. She's from Poland, or she was. I mean, she's passed away now for a while, but she was from Poland. She grew up here in the States, but she lost a lot of family in Poland during World War II. And so I did, but she did. But, her maiden name, her middle name, it was all names that I pulled from. So Agatha Catherine Stremka, which is Jack's grandmother, Catherine Stremka is my grandmother's middle name and maiden name. I pulled a lot of like there's a lot of personal attachment to these characters, and it's what I hope comes out in the stories as well.
I will say I can see that. So again, I don't want The Forgotten Fortune, your first book. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think how to say this. The scene in the historical area of import from World War II, where it's really the inciting incident for the whole story. You can see that come through there. It's as much emotional as it is action packed, and it's a pretty cool scene. Again, I don't want to give anything away. But,
no, yeah, thank you. It's been out for a bit. If people haven't read it, I guess it's kind of like movie spoilers, right? If you haven't seen it by now, it's kind of your own fault. There's a lot of that, and I've talked about, it's okay to humanize your characters. People want to see your character cry. They want to see your character just get beat to snot. They want to see him bleeding. They want to see him depressed. They want to see him, not everybody can be the 80s and 90s action hero, the Stallones and, Schwarzeneggers of the world. That had its place for a long time, but now it's just seen as, very cheesy and unrealistic. And we are trying to bring a little realism into these fictional tales. And a lot of that is just blending our own experiences and I guess in our own emotion into these characters without it just being like us, because that would be like incredibly boring. I would have died immediately in a situation like that. But I think that's where, you know, the connection is real when it comes to these good stories where, you know, maybe that's something that some authors need to kind of reflect on. You know, if they think they truly write a great story and for one reason or another it doesn't sell, it's not necessarily a marketing problem. It's not necessarily a subject matter problem. Maybe there's just not enough of themselves in the characters.
So something you just said, good stories. I had somebody said this long before me, but bad decisions make good stories. And when I'm in doubt, I always try and remember that. It's like, okay, where do we go from here? Somebody's got to make a bad decision. This will get interesting real fast.
Yeah.
Because we're all human, and we all make bad decisions. And the more humanized your characters can be, the less characteristic they become.
Yeah. Like I don't want them to be like too like I said, like that cliche where it's like, okay, like, because then you can just see where it's going. You know, there's no suspense, there's no wonderment anymore. It's like I've seen this story 100 times and I know exactly what's about to happen. And, you know, like, I mean, if as you probably know, Jack loses a lot of fights. He is a guy that isn't afraid to fight dirty. He has zero qualms with fighting dirty because in real life, there is no such thing as a fair fight. And even though he's got the military background, he's got the confidence in himself. He also understands when he's outmatched. He also understands when not fighting is the answer. And that's a realistic way to look at things. You know, you're not just going to charge headlong into, you know, a group of 10 mercenaries with a paperclip. You know, you're not MacGyvering yourself out of this kind of situation. You are going to die, and that would be a short series.
Oh. No, so, you know, kind of to bring it back around, you were talking about how we all have a piece of this in the past, and I think that, you know, nobody's perfect, and you do a great job. And what I think people get engaged with, I know I do, is that if we have somebody who you can see a little bit of yourself in, be it the protagonist, the antagonist, whoever, if you can see some reality, either, you know, that I can relate to this person or somebody I know can relate to it. You mentioned your grandmother was an inspiration for Jack's grandmother. If you can see that, and I'm sure other people can see some qualities or characteristics that their grandparents had, creating that link between the consumer, the reader, which could be me or you or anybody else, any of our readers, and in the story, that really drives the engagement, and that really makes it resonate.
Yeah, and completely agree. You know, so back, you were talking about the Revolutionary War and stuff, and that kind of stuff that you're into. I also know you did a book in your, what is it, Parker Chase?
Yes, yeah.
That is very heavily influenced in that, correct?
So correct. That the Parker Chase series, it all starts out. It's tied to the MacGuffins, the kind of the artifacts, mysteries. They're surrounding the Revolutionary War period to begin the first few books of that series. Just because it's a fascinating time. The world's changing. There are so many question marks, and that's one of the beauties of writing about the past. There's so much we don't know, and so much that could plausibly have happened. So it's an endless mine of inspiration to find story ideas. That focuses on a guy who's going through some trauma. He's like, and this was kind of an attempt. He's an everyman, and he's a regular Joe, and he just gets caught up in something bigger than himself, and it turns into a whirlwind story of action, adventure, personal discovery, relationships, loss, like the whole 9 yards. And something you said earlier made me think about this. You can quickly get in over your head if you don't rein your characters in.
Yep.
That is a lesson everyone has to learn. You have these grand ideas, but it's important to tell the story.
Yeah, and learn from my experience, and don't get too far into a series before you realize that. So, and unfortunately, I learned the hard way, but I'm human, and at the time was a very young writer. Not that I'm an old man in this industry by any means, but I've learned a lot and I am currently working on my 28th title.
Wow.
For a long time, I was pumping out nearly about 5 to 6 books a year, and various lengths. I have a few novellas baked into there, but but then there's like this thing called kids and a house and a family, and for a while I'm still working full time. Recently it's changed, but it's one of those situations where you slow down, and for the better, at least in my current situation, is it's weird. It's like the evolution of a writer, and I'm actually kind of interested in your take on this. Is early in my work, I was very straightforward and to the point with everything I wrote, because I didn't want to beat around the bush. I didn't want to feel like I was wasting time, or the reader's time, I should say, filling a story with a bunch of fat that was unnecessary. Now, my books are almost twice as long as they used to be, and none of it feels fattening. It's like not bragging by any means, but it's more self-realization. I'm like, this book should have been over a long time ago, and it's not. And it's just the story developing. I'm more willing to go down those rabbit holes because I'm more confident that I can get out of them. And it's like a lot of my books, I always targeted like 70 to 80,000 words because I thought the reader would see the word count, see the page count, and be more willing to give me a try, because it wasn't this long, exasperated tale of fat. And, the last 2 books I've put together have been 120,000 plus, and it's completely and wholly on accident. Like the new Jack Riley Undying Kingdom is still going, and it's like 118,000, and I'm nearing the end. So, but it's like I don't plan on it. It wasn't anything but this is where my partner Nick and I have talked, and he goes, it's probably just you evolving as a storyteller and being more comfortable with going the extra mile and being confident in it versus steering clear of it because you're more afraid of it. And I was kind of interested in your decade-long career now, kind of from start to finish. Have you seen like that same type of evolution in your storytelling where you're like the realization of it, I want to say, where you're like, man, like you sit back and you kind of reflect and you're like, there's no way I would have done this 5 years ago. And now you're like, let's do it. Let's go. Like, I don't know if you've had any kind of moments like that.
So the short answer is yes. And one thing you said made a lot of sense to me. You were worried about having too much fat. I think as we grow as storytellers, we realize that having the right type of fat provides the best flavor. And I know that's a terrible cooking analogy.
Yeah.
You trim it all down until it's as lean as can be. You risk not giving the story time to breathe. Like you said, you can narrow it down, but you don't want to. You learn as you go. You evolve, and your stories evolve with you as a writer. So now the story, what I'm hearing is It's a lot like what I've experienced. I would aim for that. 80 to 100,000 words, somewhere in there. And now I'm still in the same ballpark, but those words are tighter and they're slower. So you have your peaks and valleys in your story. You have you hit the high points, but then you also realize that even though the action may have stopped, the development doesn't stop. And so you learn more about the people in your story, and it's a slower pace. It's a higher word count. There's a little more meat to it, but what you're doing is providing a more satisfying overall experience.
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful way of putting it. Exactly. And I'm also more dedicated to the setting where, like, it'll be 100% centered around Jack. But even if it's as simple as him driving through, like, the foothills of the Himalayas, and he's seen these really awesome sights and these cool things, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the actual storyline. The experience of him seeing it is also giving the reader the experience, because I don't know about you, I probably am never going to go to the foothills of the Himalayas in my life. So why not explore it a little bit vicariously through your characters? But I think that goes back to what we were talking about, is when you have a character-driven series, people don't mind following your character on this like B part of the story, because they want to be around and ride along with the character. And that's one thing that I've noticed is it's more fascinating, fun, but in a different way. Because it's like, I want to know more about this area. I want to know more about the villages at the foothills, you know, in Nepal, outside of Kathmandu, and like that area. Like, I want to know more about that stuff. And like through my research, I'm like, it's kind of like what we were talking earlier. Is like it's almost like a disservice to the reader if I don't put this in, because it's so beautiful and it's so cool. And it's like, why would I not include that? Like I would be like angry at myself for not including it. So I just include it, but try to have, obviously it needs to link somehow and it needs to have some sort of like story development within it. But it's just kind of one of those things where I think I've grown. Like and this is just the last few years. This isn't like a terribly, you know, old idea. This is just like, I can go back into some of the other books that I've put together years ago and been like, man, I wish I had done that back then because the setting was amazing. But at the time, my brain is going, it has nothing to do with the story. Is it necessary? Well, theoretically, no, it's not necessary. But damn it, I wish I should have done it. Or I wish I did do it. You know, it's like, but that is the evolution that I'm talking about. Is now I don't bother with that. I don't care about it. I just do it. And it just feels right nowadays.
Yeah. One thing we probably both have experienced is over time you realize how a smaller amount of the seasoning, a smaller amount of information regarding that can allow the reader to come along with you when they fill in the blanks in their mind. So you're so active about it. And that increased word count, you get a lot more bang for your buck for that.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, 100%. 100%. So, well, Andrew, we are approaching the 50-minute mark, and I told myself I wanted these videos to be around 45, and but darn it, we're just enjoying ourselves and really getting into some deep philosophical writing conversation, and I absolutely loved it. I really enjoyed sitting down and talking with you. Obviously, I'm going to want to do this again down the road in whatever facet we can come up with. But I really want to thank you for coming on and chit-chatting with me and really getting to kind of know you more, know your work more, understand your work more, kind of where it comes from and where it's going from here. Give us a quick rundown on where we can find you, including obviously all your work on Amazon. Please go find it. But as far as anything else, where can we find you social media-wise and all that stuff?
Sure. So best place is probably my website. It's just my name, ANDREWCLAWSON.com. You can find me on Facebook. Those are the best two places. If you want to reach out, shoot me an email. I get back to everybody. I love hearing from readers. And, I also have all my audiobooks for the Harry Fox series will be out in the next few months. So if people are into audio, that's coming. Cool. I also want to say thanks. It's been a blast. It's great to meet a kindred soul. Finally, get to chat about this kind of stuff. It's for the first time at length. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And for those of you watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We will have more videos just like this coming out. And for those of you listening on podcast, do the same thing and tell your friends, tell everybody where you can find Andrew's work. He will very much appreciate it. Have a good one, guys. We will talk to you next time. Welcome to Real Life Fiction. I'm Matt James with Conundrum Publishing, international best-selling author of the Jack Riley Adventure Series. And today we will be talking to author Andrew Clawson.